This video is brought to you in part by Ridge Wallets. Guys, I get it. I enjoy a novelty wallet featuring your favorite franchise, but you already give that franchise all your money. It doesn't need to be the thing that carries all your money, especially since that stuff gets kinda ratty just after a few months of use. You should be carrying your money instead in something a little more modern, and that's where Ridge comes in. They've taken something as standard as those chunks of worn down leather and have really classed up the back pocket. Heck, their wallets are so slim I actually use it in my front pocket, something I never thought I'd be able to do. And it can still hold up to 12 cards and my cash. This little sucker's actually doing a lot of work. They're made of high quality material, which also means they come with a lifetime guarantee. This can be the last wallet you ever have to buy, and it's made with RFID blocking technology, so you don't have to worry about digital pickpockets. There's just a lot to love about this wallet, and the same can be said about their key case. Tired of that pokey mess of metal in your pocket? This thing clears up space and organizes all of your keys. Also made with high quality material, all that stuff. They just make great products. And even if you aren't looking for one for yourself, they do make fantastic gifts. But wait, do you hear that? Out from the ad, there rose such a clatter. Spring from your bed and see what's the matter. Nothing's the matter. It's just me, Saint Nick. And I bring the gift of discounts. You can get up to 40% off through December 22nd if you shop with Ridge.com. And hey, I even brought the link. It's in the description. Go check it out. Happy birthday or whatever it is. Thanks again to Ridge for sponsoring, and let's get on with it. Welcome back to Sonic Speed Reading. Archie Sonic Speed Reading. We just got done looking at the very first issue to feature Knuckles the Echidna, and we're gonna jump ahead to his next appearance, which is in the Sonic and Knuckles special that was part of the canon but separate from the main series. They did this quite a bit, eventually naming these special 48-page comics super specials, but this was before all of that. And where issue 13, which first featured Knuckles and a slight adaptation of Sonic 3, was originally released in August of 1994, this book was released in August of 1995. A full year after issue 13. It took that long to finally see Knuckles again in the Archie book. And like I explained when I was talking about issue 13, I had missed out on that issue, and I was deeply bummed out because I was desperate to see the Echidna in anything outside of the games. It's wild to think that it took them this long to adapt part 2 of the story, long after Sega themselves stopped promoting the game. And actually, as you can notice on the cover itself, we have references to other things that had already been released or on their way to be released. We have a reference to Spinball, the Sega 32X, and a Sega Saturn sitting in a pile of trash. Even back then, they understood the writing was on the wall for that machine. The cover itself is beautifully detailed, but doesn't really give you an idea of what the story is. We just know that Knuckles is probably tricked by Robotnik once again and is about to sucker punch the Hedgehog, which, to be fair, is literally the very first thing Knuckles did to Sonic when they met. It is a little weird that it clearly is taking place in Robotropolis on the cover, but that's not where the story itself takes place. It is still gorgeous, of course. Patrick Spaziante, being the amazing artist that he is, really made this pop out on shelves. I still remember seeing this for the very first time in a Walmart back in the day, and I about had a heart attack seeing an adaptation for my favorite game, and finally seeing the beloved Echidna in Archie and properly displayed on a cover and given a proper giant size 48-page special edition. Now turning the page, we see a lot of credits for what seems to be 3 separate stories. Again, fairly common for old Sonic books, something you always had to keep in mind with the 48-page specials. The stories were never actually 48 pages, it was usually a collection of stories. I'm not going to butcher all these names like I did last time, but as you can see from the script, we once again have Mike Kantorovich and Ken Penders working on the story together, and the 2 follow-up stories afterwards are written by Ken himself. It does make you wonder just how much Ken wrote of the first story that we're going to be looking at, because the tone is wildly different compared to when Ken is just left on his own. And turning the page from there, we're seeing a page full of text, which was fairly common for the big specials and could get eye-rollingly melodramatic, but I gotta admit, I feel like Ken, I'm assuming Ken wrote this, did a pretty good job describing everything. It tells us of the planet of Mobius, once beautiful, having become a scarred, lifeless battlefield thanks to the relentless acts of the scientific terrorism unleashed by the evil techno-tyrant Dr. Ivo Robotnik. But one great natural wonder remains untouched by the devastation. The mysterious floating island, a mighty continent, the island is held aloft by the energy of a rare and powerful gem known as a Chaos Emerald, a world unto itself with its origins lost to antiquity. This sprawling, multi-zoned landmass drifts lazily above the face of Mobius, existing in harmony, yet forever apart. I just thought that was a great line. It goes on to describe Knuckles, the last of an ancient noble race, his charge to preserve the peace and protect the island's boundaries from encroachment and harsh realities of the outside world, a task handed down generation unto generation. These are things that were not described when we first met Knuckles back in issue 13, so clearly they've been working on a bit of backstory for the character, as well as a little bit of retconning here and there, as his main charge was protecting the Chaos Emerald, and now it seems to be guardian of the island in general. Now, you could argue that's one and the same, especially when you consider that Game Knuckles is guardian of the Master Emerald and Angel Island in general, even if there seems to be a larger focus on the Master Emerald. But as it was established in terms of Archie canon, Knuckles is guarding a Chaos Emerald, and while they are rare and all-powerful, it's not unique like the Master Emerald is. Knuckles really treats this like a battery more than anything else. But we'll get into more of the changes as we come across them. Let's get into the story itself. We kick things off on a beach, the western coast of the great continent. And while it's prone to many natural disasters, it remains one of the few regions on Mobius that's unscarred by conflict, and therefore the natives can frolic and romp without care. That is until a big-ass island just shows up on their front door. This, I thought, was a cool visual back in the day, and while I did understand this was taking quite a few liberties from the game I cherish so much, the idea of the floating island just randomly showing up, having remained a mystery all this time, to suddenly freak out all the Mobians who weren't even aware this thing existed, was just a really cool idea. And of course, it catches the attention of the freedom fighters. We turn our attention over them as Rotor explains the situation, telling us what we already know. This is a floating island. Sally asks what's keeping it afloat, and Rotor has no idea, but according to his readings, it's heading straight for Knothole Village, which, if you're unfamiliar, is the home base of Sonic and his freedom fighter buddies. And speaking of the Hedgehog, him and Tails walk in, asking what they missed. Sally's about to scold them for being late, but is interrupted as Sonic and Tails take notice to the screen, immediately recognizing the floating island. Sally asks them to fill them in, and they take the rest of the page describing everything that happened back in issue 13, and since we have already done that, we're going to skip all that here. But I do find it strange that Sonic and Tails never bothered to tell the rest of the team about this wild and crazy floating island. I know they're only doing this to help catch up readers who might have missed that previous issue, and I admittedly was one of those people back in the day, but still it is strange. And stranger still is the fact that Sally is seemingly unaware of the floating island and Knuckles and everything. Not to spoil too much of future issues in Archie, but as was common back in the day, and still to this day with a lot of comics, there were a lot of retcons as they were figuring story beats out. And while Sally currently is unaware of the floating island, it would later be retconned to show that she actually has an extensive history with the island and Knuckles himself. We will deal with that when we have to deal with that, but if you're looking backwards after reading future issues, this will sound rather strange. Anyway, Sally gives the order for Sonic and Tails to head over to the island to see what's going on, why is it heading to Knothole, and they're going to be piloted by Antoine, even though the tornado is a thing and that's how they got there to begin. Doesn't matter. As the three fly towards the island, turrets pop out from its underside and begin to open fire. Unable to make a safe landing, Sonic decides to parachute with Tails following close behind while Antoine makes a retreat. And while we're already diverting quite a bit from the original game story, the two at least land in Mushroom Hill Zone. And again, we're seeing another note of early Western Sonic storytelling, as Tails is yet to be described as the genius he's known to be these days, as Sonic is actually explaining what type of mushrooms these are to the fox. And while he gazes at the giant fungi, he's then clonked by one of the pendulums that you find in the game itself. This causes him to briefly hallucinate into thinking that the mushrooms are out to eat him. I don't know why they bothered putting this in here, but there you go. Also not sure how that pendulum clocked him in the head, as you need somebody to get it functioning, but best not to overthink it. Once Sonic comes to, he grabs a hold of the pendulum and uses it to hop to the top of the mushrooms. But as he bounces from one to the next, he's nearly beheaded by an axe and ends up face to face with that lumberjack mini boss you find in SNK. After a brief fight, Sonic takes the robot down and Tails and the Hedgehog speed along. Unfortunately, it's cut short as Sonic accidentally falls into a ravine. Thankfully, he grabs a hold of a ledge where he's greeted by a familiar silhouette. And that's where part 1 ends. Again, I feel like I need to explain this every time. Keep in mind that when I say part 1 and part 2, unlike later comics where that usually indicates the end of one issue and the beginning of another, early Archie would break up their stories mid-issue in parts. And part 2 begins with Sonic and Knuckles reunited and a drastic shift in art style. Part 1 had been drawn by Art Mahoney, and part 2 is now penciled by Dave Manick. And while both of these guys are iconic, especially when it comes to early Archie, their art styles are drastically different and it's kind of distracting. But yeah, let's keep going. Sonic's still under the impression that he's friendly with the Echidna, asks how he's doing. Knuckles, however, blames Sonic for turning his island into a war zone, and he sees this as his second offense and says, "Long live the king," as he crushes Sonic's fingers with his foot. But just then, Tails decides to drop a boulder onto Knuckles' head. Knuckles does leap out of the way just in time, but this in turn causes both Sonic and Knuckles to go tumbling into the pit, with the two of them ending up on a rocky platform in a river of lava. Clearly, Lava Reef Zone. A short fight is almost about to break out between the two for a single panel, but their little platform begins to rumble and is about to collapse, but thankfully, both are rescued by Tails, who flies them back to the surface of the island. And from there, things calm down, with Sonic pointing out that the stars are all out of place. I don't know how Sonic took notice to this, or Knuckles for that matter, but yeah, they use this as the explanation for things being off. I guess this means that the floating island stays in one particular place on Mobius. Whatever the case is, it's clearly established at the beginning of the issue that even if the island moves, it's never been over the continent itself. And thus, the stars are out of place, and Knuckles, having taken notice, realizes that his island has been hijacked. Sonic also explaining that there are now engines and guns on the underside, and that's what brought him and Tails back to Knuckles' home. Knuckles feels like an idiot, feeling like he's been duped yet again, and decides to show the two heroes his shortcut to the Chaos Chamber, which is very reminiscent to him showing the secret entrance to Sky Sanctuary. And the Chaos Chamber, best I can surmise, was the original Archie adaptation of the Hidden Palace Zone, something that would eventually change much later on. As the three enter the Chaos Chamber, it's clear things are off, as there's an energy siphon drawing power from the Emerald. Knuckles approaches it and immediately gets zapped, which, again, probably a callback to the events in Hidden Palace. Knuckles is knocked to the ground, and a projection of Robotnik appears before Sonic, saying he's been expecting them. And like any good villain, he goes on to explain his evil plot. Basically, he took a mobile command base and drilled into the foundation of the island, releasing a whole bunch of mechanisms within the guts, including an engine, weapons for defense, and a siphon for the Emerald, all while being controlled by Robotnik in an underground command center. With the energy of the Emerald harnessed, he would use that to power the engines, which would push the island towards Knothole Village, where he would use the guns to take out the Mobians below, which, as cartoony as it sounds, is kind of a fun idea. I love the idea of Robotnik just hijacking the island and turning it into a giant sky base. That said, Knothole Village is supposed to be a secret from Robotnik. That's how the Freedom Fighters have managed to survive as long as they have. And here it seems like he just knows where it is, so that's a little bit of a plot hole. But going on from there, Robotnik thanks Knuckles for keeping Sonic and Tails occupied. And this whole time I was wondering why Robotnik would just give out all of his plans, especially when the three heroes are in the Chaos Chamber. But as Robotnik explains, the island's already in position and there's nothing they can do to stop him. But Knuckles, as the island's guardian, refuses to let it be used this way. So he removes the Emerald from the pedestal and smashes it to pieces. And with the Emerald destroyed, the island begins to fall towards Mobius. Robotnik makes a hasty retreat, removing his mobile command center from the island and flying off. While he didn't get away with the Emerald, fact of the matter is, the island was floating above Knothole Village, so that means it's going to crash onto the Mobians below, which was ultimately Robotnik's goal. But once Robotnik leaves, Knuckles opens up a hidden compartment, popping out what seems to be another Emerald and puts it back in the pedestal, which halts the island's fall. Later on, Knuckles explains that he just did a quick switcheroo. He had a fake Emerald there the entire time, and that is actually what he destroyed. As it turns out, removing the real Emerald from the pedestal caused the island to fall, but once removed, Knuckles had swapped it out for the fake, which was the one that was smashed, and after Robotnik left, he put the hidden real one back in its place, if that makes sense. With the day saved, Sonic and Tails say their goodbyes, is, and Tails flies Sonic back to Mobius below, where they're greeted by the rest of the Freedom Fighters. Sally says she's glad they're alright, but asks about Knuckles. Sonic says they just missed him, as he and the floating island are shipping out for parts unknown, so I guess it does float in some sort of direction out there somewhere. And once he gets to wherever he's going, Knuckles is going to remove all the components that Robotnik had implemented on the island. Sally then asks Sonic a question that I'm sure plenty of readers were asking back in the day. Will Knuckles ever join the Freedom Fighters? To which Sonic says, I doubt it. Now and forever, he's on his own, with the last page showing us an outline of a Knuckles clearly drawn by Patrick Spaziante, as it doesn't look anything like the rest of the art we've seen so far in the story. From there, we had 2 follow-up stories, and to my surprise back in the day, they were both solely focused on Knuckles. The first one is Fire Drill, where we see Knuckles responding to an explosion and slowly making his way through a bit of a mystery, ending up in Sandopolis Zone, which was pretty cool to see back in the day, as the first story only covered a couple of zones. We're gonna cover this particular story in a different video, as it is a multi-part lead up to the Knuckles mini-series that would be showing up later. So we're gonna skip on ahead to the final story, which is the Lord of the Floating Island. Nothing crazy happens here. Knuckles just comes across a baby Kanga looking for its mom. At least that's what the comic calls it. Baby kangaroos are called Joeys, but whatever. Not a lot really goes on here, like I said. Knuckles just picks up the kid and slowly makes his way across the island to help him track down his mom. What's significant here is further defining this version of Knuckles and this version of the Floating Island, at least the lore that would be set up by Ken. Anyway, let's get back to the story. It starts off with Knuckles noticing the winds around the island really acting up. From there, he comes across the baby Kanga and floats on down to help out. The baby Kanga says he wants his mama, and Knuckles reassures him that he'll help him out, also taking a moment to introduce himself, but the little guy already knows who Knuckles is, as his mommy told him all about the echidna, saying that Knuckles watches over everyone on the island. Knuckles says, well, that's part of what I do, and the little dude asks, so do you think you can bring the sky back too? Knuckles looks to where he's pointing, confused, and notices an eclipse. He explains to the little kangaroo what an eclipse is, and goes on to say that the island floats along air currents, and as such, the wind rarely blows stronger than a mild breeze, but things have been changing lately. But before he can continue, he notices a thundering sound, and that's caused by a herd of dingoes. So first off, that would be a pack of dingoes, not a herd. Secondly, look at these ridiculous critters. This might sound silly considering that Knuckles is an anthropomorphic critter himself, but all these dingoes with their blue shoes and gloves and their little knapsacks, the dingo species actually becomes quite important later on in Archie Knuckles lore, but considering this is the very first time we see them, they look absolutely insane. These animals don't travel like this. Why would you pick this species to show off as a panicking herd? After all that, the eclipse ends, and with it, the strong winds, and the baby Kanga, who apparently is named Benji, is reunited with his mother. She thanks Knuckles, who says he's just doing his job, this is his island, and he lives to protect and serve, as he just flies off, I guess. And that's where the story ends. Now, I wanted to talk about this one specifically because they are taking quite a few liberties from what we know in the games. As we saw with those ridiculous dingoes and the kangaroos, Knuckles is not the only sentient creature on the floating island, which is a massive difference from the games. His isolation comes not only from being the last of his species, but also from the lack of other sentient critters to talk to on Angel Island. That's very clearly not what they are going for here in Archie. Granted, this is still very early on, but even as a kid, I thought this was super strange. It does make sense. Obviously, animals are treated a little bit differently on Mobius. It does make sense that there would be other sentient animals, but yeah, even to this day, having a populated floating island is still surreal to me, and it just gets wilder from here in terms of Archie. The other thing I noticed, and something I do believe they play into as well, there's clearly an emphasis on Australian animals here. And that makes sense because echidnas in the real world come from Australia. So populating the floating island with other Australian animals does make sense. I understand the logic in that thinking. Overall, I was a pretty big fan of this special as a kid. It's nothing too wild and crazy looking back on it all these years later. I still really hate the jarring change in art styles in the first story, and knowing where the mystery leads in the second story kind of takes the wind out of my sails. It was very exciting trying to see what that was all leading up to, and I'll go ruin that for you guys another day. And again, this last story just feels weird to me. But all that said, even with all the drastic changes from the video game, and knowing what this would later become, and also knowing that Fleetway was really knocking it out of the park in terms of game adaptations, all the things I could pick apart in hindsight, I still look back on this this fondly. I was very, very excited to see Knuckles finally getting the recognition he deserved. The gaming industry was moving a mile a minute. After Sonic and Knuckles had released, Sega was already moving on to the 32X and the Sega Saturn. And of course, Nintendo and PlayStation were doing their thing. And Archie, at this point, had established quite a few characters separate from the game. Again, it had been a full year since we had even seen Knuckles in this book. And speaking personally, I had missed that issue. So obviously, this holds quite a special place in my heart. Regardless of what you think about Ken Penders or old Archie lore, I had a lot of fun with this back in the day, and I had fun revisiting this. But that's gonna do it for today, guys. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you want to see any more of Archie Knuckles, or if you want me to take a step back and take a look at Archie as a whole, or whatever else. I'll be getting to Frontier soon, I promise. But I wanted to do a couple of lighter videos just to get my voice back on track after being demolished from that stupid virus. So hopefully I wake up tomorrow without feeling like I've eaten fire. Thank you to all the patrons who've been supporting me. You're seeing their names on the screen right now. Sorry for once again skipping the patron readout, but that list is quite long. I'm quite grateful for it, but right now my throat is not. I'm already regretting recording as long as I have here. I'm gonna give my voice a break, and I'll catch you guys again very soon. Until next time, toot toot, Sonic Warriors.